Testing, testing. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you guys all had a nice lunch and welcome to the cost effect the cost effective branding and design seminar brought to you by Hired Guns. Before these legends come and speak to you guys, I wanted to introduce myself and Christian. We're here from Canvas Craft. It is Canada's only digital printer here in the West Coast. If you guys haven't heard of digital can printing, it's direct to print. Direct to can printing. It's a really good environmental alternative to shrink sleeves and paper labels. I wanted to talk a little bit about that. If you're looking for small batch sizes versus going to Crown for the whole 300,000 cans, our minimum is just one pallet. Super flexible lead times. So Hired Guns, let me introduce you a little bit to Leif Miltenberger. I had a chance to work with him when I was at Norfam. Super legendary. That's all I'm gonna say. And then Richard Hatter. If you guys want to come on here or however you guys want to take it, please welcome them.
Thank you much. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Leif Miltenberger. This is my business partner, Richard Hatter. We're the owners of Hired Guns Creative, a design company that is focused on the alcohol industry. Richard's the creative director for our company. He's the lead designer. He's responsible for a lot of what's in our portfolio, fair chunk of it, and also has final say on everything that goes out the door. I handle the business side of the business. Can't draw to save my life. Feel free to check out our website if you want while we're talking, or hit us up on social. Give us that follow that everybody needs these days. So our studio specializes in branding and packaging design for alcohol producers. So that is a lot of breweries, some distilleries, and a few wineries. We're located over in Nanaimo, but our clients are spread across North America. We got breweries, wineries, distilleries, and everything else. We've been in business since 2008, and we've been focused on the alcohol industry since 2011. Our client split is roughly 65% beer, 20% spirits, 10% wine, and 5% other stuff. Other stuff would be cider, hard seltzer, non-alcoholic beverages, and a bit of cannabis. A few more seats up front if anybody wants to come in. We design a lot of branding for various alcohol producers, and we've done a whole lot of packaging design for clients ranging from literal one-man startup breweries all the way up to folks like Mill Street Brewing, who have national distribution.
Hi. All right. So over the last 15 years, we've watched the expansion of the BC craft brewing industry, the rise of new breweries to open, the incredible explosion of new beers that have launched, and the various ways breweries have approached and evolved their brands. Today, we're here to talk about streamlining your brand. I know it's something that everybody in this room is probably pretty interested in, or else you probably wouldn't be here. So in this, we're going to cover what streamlining a brand means, reasons you should consider doing it, strategies you can take, some challenges you might face, timing, and the effects of streamlining that it can have on your business. Okay, streamlining. So what do we mean here? What is that? Streamlining involves reducing complexity, moving your brand from complex to simple. Or simpler. Anyway. I like you. This can involve simplifying the visual aspects of your brand and even a range of beers that you offer. Simplifying all of these things is not absolutely essential. For example, your branding. If you've got a solid logo, stick with it. If you're using 4 different versions of a lousy old logo, that is, inconsistent and frustrating to work with. You should probably refine that mess into a single solid logo. Just consolidate. But before you decide to have a completely new logo designed, make a list of all your branded collateral that you'll need to get reprinted, add up the cost of that printing bill. A slightly simplified and refined version of your logo is often the way to go. This is a common approach that we see when brands have streamlined. On the essential side of things, your packaging designs definitely need to be part of any streamlining process. Reducing the visual clutter of your packaging is key, like the key aspect to streamlining a brewery's brand. That means shifting your design approach back along the spectrum that runs between fully templated design and fully custom designs. We'll be diving into this point in greater detail shortly, so stick with us.
It's also essential when you're streamlining a brand to take a good hard look at the number of beers that you currently offer and have that tough conversation about which ones probably should be getting cut. Last summer, there was a consumer survey report discussed by Bart Watson, who is the chief economist for the Brewers Association in the United States. If you're not familiar with Bart Watson, highly recommend following him on Twitter. Absolutely, this guy's got his hand on the North America, or he's got a really solid, really up-to-date understanding of the North American beer market. So in 2016, only 25, when they did this survey in 2016, only 26% of the people who responded to the survey said that they shopped for beer by brand versus the 74% who shopped by style of beer. So 3 out of 4 people go into a store looking for an IPA, but the brand they bought could change week to week. When they redid this survey in 2022, those numbers had changed pretty drastically, with 38% of people reporting that they now shop for the brand first rather than going for a certain style first. And that is a major shift. And it's going to have long-term ramifications. I also think we're going to see that, I don't love making predictions, but I think that's just going to keep going that way. This means that breweries are going to need to step up on the long-term brand building efforts. And there was one other really notable detail from that 2022 survey, was that 43% of the customers who responded, of the consumers who responded, said that there was, quote, just enough choice on the craft beer shelf these days. So no one is asking for more variety right now. On a personal level, as a craft beer drinker, I'm with them. Yes, question here. It is US numbers, and they do. We don't have Canadian numbers that I can find on this question, unfortunately. But like I said, I was going to say there, my gut feel here is kind of the same, and maybe I'm getting old, maybe I'm tired, I don't know. But I feel like maybe there's a bit too much choice in the market these days. And I'm certainly hearing that same sentiment when we talk to buyers at the big retail chains. When faced with too many options, consumers develop decision fatigue. Some people refer to it as a paralysis of choice when there's just too many options. They revert back to what they know is going to work for them. They move back to reliable brands rather than try and navigate a really overwhelming style category like IPAs, for example. Going forward, I think the game of growing your brand by releasing a constant stream of new beers is going to keep getting more and more difficult. You're all going to do it anyway. I know that, and that's fine. And the rest of the presentation deals with that. But I think it's worth noting that it's going to be harder. I think some breweries are going to need to dial back that schedule a little bit and, put in, maybe transfer some of that hard work into building the brand through other means. And since you're considering what SKUs to cut, you might as well consider if you really need to be offering your products in 2 different sizes of cans and 1 size of bottles. Maybe is it finally time to ditch the glass, move over to cans, or maybe make the move to just a single size of cans? Do you really need 3 different mix packs? This step in streamlining your brand is not essential, but anything you can do to simplify your packaging formats is going to help with the overall streamlining of your brand. And last up, there are other aspects of your business that you could consider streamlining as well, of course. Things that are not strongly tied to the visual side of your brand. But honestly, we're not the right guys for giving competent advice on that stuff. You know, we're focused so much on the visual side of this world. So if you were thinking about that stuff, I definitely would recommend seeking out somebody like, I don't know, First Key or some sort of consultant like that to bounce those ideas off. So why would you want to streamline your brand? What's the point? What's the benefit? This takes me back to a question I've been thinking about a lot lately to try and answer this. And it sounds like kind of a stoner question, you know, while you're sitting on the couch thinking into it, but what's the point of a beer label? Why do we spend so much time and effort on this stuff? Why can't it just say IPA, big letters? That would be enough. Why is the branding of breweries so important that we're up on stage talking about it? And to answer this, I think it's best if you put yourself in the mindset of a craft beer consumer, specifically somebody standing in a liquor store looking at your beer for the first time. There's some aspect of the design of your can that caught their eye and they picked up a 4-pack. So obviously, I mean, at the beginning, a beer label needs to communicate the basics. What kind of beer am I buying? How much liquid am I getting? How strong is it? Is it going to get me where I need to go? Next up, it's really helpful if the label contains some sort of indication of the beer's flavor, although you see a ton that don't. You know, that person who's holding that 4-pack for the first time is wondering if they're going to enjoy the beer. And at some point in the buying process, most people are going to start to consider who made the beer. You know, if they don't already know about your brewery, they start forming an opinion of your brand immediately based off of what they can see on the can. Some people are also going to want to know the ingredients, the allergens, all that stuff. And while they're contemplating your 4-pack, one of the things that eventually goes through their head is an assessment of value. You know, is this beer worth the $18 price tag? What's the chance that they're going to be disappointed after they take that first sip? If they're completely new to your brewery, that can be a hard question for somebody to answer. And one of the last things that I think a customer is going to consider when holding your 4-pack is how the beer fits with their identity. And I know that sounds flaky, but I don't think it should be overlooked. And look, I don't think that every consumer thinks about this for every single purchase. I really don't think that people spend much time considering this when they're just grabbing a 4-pack to drink at home. I think mostly it comes into play when the person's looking to bring beer to a social gathering. You know, they consider how the people at that gathering are going to react to the beer, and then by extension, how they're going to get judged for that beer that they brought. And this, I think, is especially true if your can design is really pushing the boundaries of what is typical in the craft beer market. You know, if you have something really out there that doesn't look like any other beer. But like I said, this doesn't happen with every purchase, so I'm just putting this one in brackets for now. All right, so the point of a beer label is to address all these questions in order to convince that consumer to take a chance and purchase your beer for the first time. And to make that happen, first of all, you got to get their attention. Your beer cannot answer any of the person's questions if it doesn't get their attention in the first place. You're never going to acquire that new customer if they don't stop and pick that 4-pack up out of the cooler. I saw so many breweries come out with new can designs that just blend into the sea of everything else. They don't stand out. And with that approach, I mean, they're struggling to attract new customers. Whereas packaging is crucial to ensure that the products are going to stand out. And I cannot overemphasize that point enough. Don't just evaluate this new can design that your designer sent you within the context of your own personal aesthetic or within the context of everything else that you sell. You know, line that up against the competitors' products. Put it in that competitive set and really step back and look at it and see if it jumps out. If it doesn't, you might want to take another run at that design. So, assuming you've done all this, you caught somebody's eye, you've effectively answered all their questions. Beyond all that, what's the point of a beer label? You know, from where we're sitting, the real point of these labels is to build your brand. This is the prize at the top of the pyramid. Forgive my silly metaphor there. Once you get past all the basics, once you're able to effectively use labels to attract new customers, building your brand then becomes the real point of a beer label. And a streamlined brand is much easier to build. Yes. Okay. Sorry. That threw me a little. So if the point of a beer label is to build a brand, build your brand, eventually you're going to start looking around for the easiest ways to go about it. And this is where streamlining really comes into play. Streamlined brands, like I just said, are very easy to build, and they're even easier to maintain. On the design and the administrative side, a streamlined brand can help you save time, effort, stress, money, emotional damage of the design process, all of that stuff. We're going to show you some examples here and talk them through. The process of streamlining your brand can also give you some of the benefits of a really drastic rebrand. You know, some breweries you've definitely seen rebrand over the years, and there are some benefits that can come with that if it's done well. You know, it can give you the chance to realign your visual identity with your brand's values and goals. And this can be really useful if your brand is evolving, you know, if there's new ownership, maybe, or new focus for the brand, maybe going into new markets, that sort of thing. And launching a streamlined brand, or sorry, streamlining your brand can give your business some of that same energy that comes with a full drastic rebrand. And it can help boost the relevancy and help you remain relevant and visible in the crowded BC market. But the really key thing to understand here when we're talking about reasons to streamline a brand is that having a streamlined brand ensures that all of the energy you put into building that brand is building recognition for your entire brewery, rather than just one or two of your beers. To effectively build a brand, I think you have to work on four main things: recognition, reputation, engagement, and loyalty. And streamlining can affect all four of those areas, but recognition, I think, most heavily, way more than the others. You know, recognition of a brand comes through visibility, repetition, consistency. We're going to come back to those points many times as we go through the examples coming up. If your brand is highly recognizable and you have a strong following and a solid reputation, customers are going to pick up every new release that you put out. And we've all got those brands, right? Where we will purchase, just personally, where we'll purchase any new product that they put out to support them and to try it because it's probably really good because they have a great reputation. A really well-designed, streamlined brand can give you a solid basis for building this level of brand recognition and just love from the consumers.
Okay, so if you've heard us speak on branding in the past, you've probably heard us discuss various approaches a brewery can take to the packaging designs of their entire lineup. On one end of the spectrum, you've got the simple option, a rigid template approach where every beer looks almost like all the other beers in your lineup. On the other end, you've got a fully custom approach where every beer that you sell looks completely different from every other beer that you sell. And then there's the hybrid approach that lands in the middle. It's not dead smack in the middle. It can move around, where parts of each beer design are templated, and the rest of the beer, and the rest of it is all custom stuff. So on one end of the rigid template approach, each product looks almost identical to every other product in the lineup. Change the product name, switch the accent color, and you're good to go. None of this is my work, by the way, but it's good examples. This is my work. On the other end of the spectrum, we see the fully custom approach. Each product looks almost completely different from every other product in the lineup. As you can see, this was a long time, many hours, but you know, everybody knows a different product when they see it on the shelf. So that's why I put the effort in. In the middle of the spectrum, there's the hybrid approach. Portions of each label stay consistent from one product to the next, but a portion is customized for each individual product. So, you know, different artwork, but everything's all lining up where it should be. You can customize just a portion of each label, half of each label, almost all of each label. So that's why I'm saying it's a spectrum. It doesn't just land dead smack in the middle. This is the preferred approach of many craft breweries of various sizes because it gives you the chance to reinforce your brand while still getting the personality of each beer across. One central decision you'll need to make when streamlining your packaging will involve shifting from a more complex approach down to a simpler approach. Simple isn't always easy, but it just looks simpler.
So as far as we can see, there's 4 options for strategies that you could adopt. You can fully streamline your brand. You can do it mostly streamlined, partially streamlined, and then there's a reverse of that. And I'm going to get into the specifics here. A fully streamlined brand would include simple branding, a reduced number of SKUs, fully templated packaging. The new look that Bowen Island just launched is a great example of this approach. I don't know how many of you guys have seen this. It really just came out probably a month ago. Northam brought us in to rebrand Bowen Island in 2017. And this slide shows the 2 earlier versions of the brand and then the one we did for them in 2017. These are the cans we designed for Bowen at that time. They use that hybrid approach that Richard was just talking about, where there's a cohesive look and feel across the range of products created by consistent placement of various branding and design elements. But then there's customized illustrations and color schemes for each beer to get some of the personality across. This look did well for them at the time. I think it gave them a 25% bump in sales, which is pretty cool. Last year, Northam called us up again to rebrand Bowen. This time with a fully streamlined approach. So the new branding that Richard did here is simplified, it's more balanced. They trimmed the total number of SKUs down to just 3, at least for now. And they moved away from that hybrid can design approach to a fairly rigid template. You know, the only thing that changes from one SKU to the next really is the accent color. And this is a perfect example of a fully streamlined brand. Like I said, simple branding, reduced number of SKUs, fully templated packaging. You can't get much leaner than this. If Northam were to launch a new beer for this brand, it's pretty easy, I think, for all of us to imagine what it would look like. You know, it would have a different accent color. And it would be instantly identifiable as being part of this brand, which is one of the main benefits of streamlining. You know, back at the beginning there, talking about brand building. If somebody can identify your new release immediately as coming from your brewery, that's when you're hitting the streamlining really well.
Okay, so the second option is mostly streamlined, where you do everything that Bowen did, but with 2 different templates. One for your cores and one for your seasonals. All right, so Nelson Brewing is a perfect example of this approach. Nelson's been around for over 30 years, one of the OG craft breweries in the province. When they came to us mid-2021, they had 3 different approaches going on with their packaging. So their cores were a hybrid approach with some consistency across the line, but not a lot. Their seasonals were almost fully custom, with the only consistency being the back panel. Their logo, barcode, love story, beer tales, etc. And they had a sub-brand called Hooligan, which was heavily templated. The motorbike and the accent color were the only things that changed between the different beers. The owners, Matt and Kate, had us start out by following the custom approach for their seasonals. These are for the seasonals that we designed for the end of 2021. Just like their other seasonals, these had custom illustrations, custom layout, custom typography, all with consistent back labels. But then they decided to streamline everything. So we set aside the heavily illustrated approach, stepped back for a reset. We put them through the process that we use when we rebrand a brewery. This slide shows the competitive set that we put together as part of that process. We collected the 5 releases from the breweries that they competed with on a regular basis. This is a really useful exercise that you should do periodically. It gives you a 10,000-foot snapshot of what you're up against. You know, that shelf changes a lot, so it's really a good idea to have that in front of you as often as you can. So the streamlining process for Nelson started with their seasonals. Their branding was solid, simple, easy to work with, effective. So we didn't need to change anything there. Everybody already knew it. And they wanted to keep their beer names for their core beers. Didn't need to change that. But everything else went out the window. We designed this template for their seasonals, large prominent branding, which is repeated on the back. So they, the can is visible regardless of however it's rotated in the store. Simple, high contrast front panel showing the beer name and the details. And then the rest of the label has a bright background with a subtle repeating pattern made up of monoline icons that we've created for them. The icons relate to all the fun outdoorsy things you can do in the Kootenays, with a couple of wild cards thrown in there just for fun. It gets pretty fun if you look at their beers. There's, it's increasingly cool stuff on there, I think. Over the first half of 2022, we extended this new template to multiple seasonals for them. Each beer got a new accent color, a new set of icons for the background pattern. And most of the colors are very bright, very vibrant, very loud, with a couple that are a bit darker to match the darker beer styles, the whole design to flavor thing that we've preached for years. Those icons have ended up being used on some of their merch and on their social media. So it's becoming more and more brand focused. With the template for the seasonals firmly established, it was time to focus on the cores. So we created a similar template for the design for the core beers. Same placement of the branding and text, same white front panel and repeated branding on the back of the cans. The accent colors for the core beers are more reserved, but not as loud, but still high contrast and very eye-catching on the shelf. And rather than the icon sets, they suggested the idea of using a different topographical maps of the region for the background element of the core beers. And we've done like a cool overprint over top of a metallic, so it's got like a sheen to it. So it's pretty neat. And while illustration is no longer a dominant component of their brand, they couldn't let it go completely, especially for beers like Hooligan. The bike's just badass, so we had to keep it. Nelson is now an excellent example of a brand that's been mostly streamlined. They have one strong logo. In their case, it didn't need to be changed for the streamlining. We covered that. The cores moved from a heavily illustrated hybrid approach to a fairly rigid template. The seasonals moved from a fully custom approach to a slightly different rigid template. And they moved Hooligan into their core tier, reducing the number of product tiers. So just like Bowen Island, it's easy to imagine what the next 5 or 10 beers from Nelson are going to look like. And their customers won't have any trouble immediately identifying those new beers as being Nelson products, which is one of the main benefits of streamlining.
The third strategy that I see that you can take when streamlining your brand is partially streamlined. Usually this means a templated approach for your core beers and then branching out with your seasonal designs. Fernie is a great example of this approach. Their cores follow a really solid template. Some of their seasonals are in that same template or almost the same template. It's been adapted to work at 473s. And they have a tier of experimental beers where the labels take a different approach. Each product in this tier has a customized label, but they are all very clearly from Fernie Brewing.
Yeah, okay. So Granville Island is another example of this approach. Same thing, their cores follow a fairly rigid template. And their seasonals have a lot more individuality to it. This approach is fairly popular and is for a good reason. It increases the ability of a seasonal to act as an energizer for your brand. You just need to make sure that the design of your seasonals is still tied securely to the design of your overall brand. If you lose that connection to the overall brewery brand, then what's the point? We didn't do the designs for Fernie or Granville Island, by the way, either, but they're just, again, solid examples that are worth mentioning.
So the last option that we can see for strategies is kind of the reverse of option 3, where the cores have more freedom and the seasonals are really templated. Backcountry followed this approach for the first couple of years that they were in business, and then it changed. I'll get into that. So their core beers took this hybrid approach. They each got a unique illustration, slightly different color schemes. And at the beginning, their seasonals had a very rigid template design. I don't know if any of you remember this. I know you do. Anybody else in the room? But this back right when they opened, very rigid, change a color, change a name, good to go. Obviously, their business model evolved quite rapidly after they opened. And this template design couldn't keep up with the crazy volume of new releases that they were putting out. So after a couple of years, this rigid template got relaxed and redesigned into what you've come to know from Backcountry. And then for the last couple of years, they've been working with somebody else, and it's gone even further into almost customized stuff. But for the first couple of years, their brand was very streamlined. In some ways, this approach makes a ton of sense financially. You know, you invest in the design of your core beers, and because you're going to keep those designs around for a long time, right? As opposed to seasonals, which are here and gone. I would just caution to make sure that the cores are consistent enough and the template design for the seasonals is firmly anchored to the brewery's brand. Backcountry's latest stuff has solved that challenge in a different way, but I definitely would not think consider that their new stuff is to be really, boy, I can't talk. Definitely wouldn't consider their current stuff to be super streamlined. That's okay. They're doing their own thing and it's working. But, you know, back to the streamlining thing, again, you need people to immediately understand that any new beer that they're looking at for the first time comes from your brewery. And I know we've been hammering on that last point, but it's super important. If you set out to streamline your brand, really consider the new can designs that you've got as part of this streamlining before you send them off to print. You know, try and think ahead. Do those designs have enough flexibility to grow with your new releases that are coming up? Can you easily imagine, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 beers down the road? Is it easy to see what those designs are going to look like? You might even want to include some sketches for a couple hypothetical beers during a streamlining process. You know, test out that can design system and see how it's going to stretch. See if you can break it and see why. You know, maybe it's a beer name that's really, really long, doesn't fit in, something like that. Maybe you run out of colors, you know. Try and imagine which guardrail you're going to bump up against first and think about how you're going to resolve that. All right. How's everybody doing? Good? Good. Okay. Excellent. We're going to plow on. We're going to forge ahead.
We're going to keep going.
We're going to keep going. Next up, we're going to talk about some of the challenges that you can face when trying to streamline a brewery brand. Some of the big ones that we've seen have to do with illustration, brand personality, and then there's all the typical challenges that you might face if you were doing a full rebrand of your brewery. A lot of those come into play as well. First on the list is illustration. Can a streamlined brand include illustration, or does that introduce too much complexity into it? You know, if you're set on including illustration in your packaging, our advice is to pick an illustration style and stick with it. These are a set of illustrated cans that we designed recently for Calgary's Common Crown Brewing. All their beers will be following this system. Everything's just in one design system now. Cores, seasonals, doesn't matter. The illustrations have a consistent style. They have a limited color palette, and there's a unique thing, I don't know what to call it, on each of them. In this case, it's these lightning bolts that make you think about the sound effects might be going on. And so that's one tip for the illustration when you're streamlining, you know, try and come up with a unique thing and include it in every illustration, then stick with that going forward. If you look at the Common Crown cans, it's easy to imagine how new releases will proceed in the future for them, right? They're going to be instantly recognizable. The brand is streamlined to the point where they will be able to crank out 5, 10, 15 more beers before they start bumping up into those guardrails, maybe even more. Each new beer is going to get a unique name. We'll change up the main accent color to something that fits with the beer style and fits with the overall sort of palette for the brand. The branding and the common elements from each label will stay in exactly the same place, exactly the same size, exactly the same color. And then we'll create a new illustration in the same style as that first set of beers. If the illustration has people in it, they're going to be done in that retro style. And we'll add some sort of lightning bolts or energy representation somehow.
Visual flair.
Sure. Visual flair. That's not bad. And they're going to want to keep that same die line for the label with the little notch on the top. That's a bit of a side tip here, but I'm contractually obligated. Every time I get up on stage, I have to mention custom die lines. If you're using labels on your cans, don't sleep on custom die lines. They're a powerful tool for building brand recognition that just doesn't get used nearly enough. Everybody sticks with a rectangle. It's so boring. spend a few $100 on a custom die and then use it for every single beer. Even if Common Crown moves to sleeves or printed cans one day, the sleeve design or the printed can design is still going to need to incorporate that notch somehow. And over time, customers are going to come to recognize that notch as part of the brand, and it will help them immediately identify new releases as coming from Common Crown. Customers aren't necessarily going to say that to you, but it's there, it's lodged.
All right. So a few more tips on integrating illustration into a streamlined brand. You should designate a portion of each label for illustration and then just stick with it. This is a range of cans that we recently designed for Apex Brewing, another Alberta brand. The Apex illustrations are always in the same place on the can, and they always stretch the full height of the can. The illustrations always use some sort of, mystical elements from the sky, like weather, sun, moon, stars. And there's always something going on with eyes, if I can get that in there. That's the unique thing that we're talking about a couple slides ago. Along with picking an illustration style, you can pick a limited range of subject matter to focus on. Ideally, the subject matter doesn't drastically change all the time. You could have a different person on every label or a different animal on every label, that sort of thing. The Apex illustrations always feature something you'd find in the woods of Western Alberta. So far that's been limited to animals and people, occasionally people wearing animals. Once you've chosen the area of subject matter to focus on, stick with it. So you might think that these intense illustrations don't really give Apex a streamlined brand, but I would disagree. Just like the previous examples we shared, it's pretty easy to imagine what the next new beer from Apex is going to look like. Even if they shifted over to using can labels later on, this layout could easily be adjusted so that the beers would still be immediately recognized as coming from Apex. I'm not going to always just do like big corporate looking beer. Like I'm still going to design and illustrate and give you cool looking stuff, but we'll just figure it out in a nice templated system. So that way it's recognizable as we keep hammering. You can even pick a limited color scheme and stick with it like we did with the SOB core beers. Consistent area for illustration elements, consistent brand elements, very limited color scheme, but custom illustrations on each beer. That limited color scheme definitely helped SOB build their brand. It gave them a great brand block on the shelf. And when they had multiple beers, it displayed in a row. Recognition through repetition and consistency.
So the next challenge to consider with streamlining has to do with your brand's personality. How do you maintain that personality when moving everything to a more streamlined approach? This is a common concern we hear from breweries that are considering streamlining, and it's a valid concern. You've spent years probably building up your brand, and I mean, not as long as these guys, but years, and you're worried that walking away from the personality of your brand is going to turn off some of your customers. Anchor's Streamlined rebrand from 2021 is the best example of streamlining a brand that stripped out its personality that I've ever seen. Don't do this. The best way we found to deal with this challenge is in the planning stage. Map out the various aspects of your brand's personality before you dive into the design process. Take a good long look in the mirror and write it all down. Ask your employees, ask your best retail accounts what they think of as your brand's personality. Ask some of your customers, and then look at it all and decide which aspects of your personality you want to keep. And keep it succinct. Don't try to cram too many personality traits into a single brand. It just comes off as cluttered. Once you've decided which aspects of the brand's personality that you want to retain, stay consistent with that. Express those personality traits somehow in the design of each beer, definitely on every core beer, and try to get, a couple of those worked into every seasonal if you can. Going streamlined does not mean that your brand will automatically lose all its personality, but it's absolutely a risk. A skillful designer can build those personality traits into a streamlined brand for you, but it has to be intentional and planned from the beginning of the process. You have to stay consistent with it. And then finally, when you streamline your brand, you'll face most of the typical challenges that come along with any full rebrand of a brewery. You know, considerations like how far should you push it away from what you have? What if you lose customers? I mean, if you're rebranding, you're going to lose a couple, but you're probably rebranding for a reason, and then you're going to gain a whole lot more, hopefully, right? How do you launch it? A full rebrand. We've spoken in the past about the challenges of rebranding, these kind of things that are not necessarily relevant to streamline, or not only relevant to streamlining your brand. And to be honest, it's a little too detailed to get into for this presentation here. But if you're interested in learning more about this, there's some resources on our website, or there's lots of other websites that deal with this challenge as well. You know, get in touch and I can point you to some good resources there. So, but it should be noted that if the process of streamlining your brand is done skillfully, you can avoid a jarring bump that a full rebrand can cause sometimes.
So the last thing you should think about when considering streamlining your brand is the timing. You might be wondering if now is the time to streamline your brand. From where we're sitting, now is a good time. The market is tough. There are too many beers on the shelves. If this is something you're thinking about, we'd recommend you start planning now, get into the design process in January, pour all that new year, new me energy into the project, and then launch in the early part of spring so that your Streamline brand has more solid visibility in the market leading up to the May long weekend. So it's all about timing. And does it matter how you launch a newly streamlined brand? If you can, we suggest trying to wind down your packaging inventory ahead of the launch date. It can be useful to launch multiple redesigned SKUs at the same time, although we know it's not always possible. Really, if you have to, you can trickle your new streamlined look out over the course of a year and it would be fine. There are already so many brands on the market with inconsistent brands that nobody will really care.
We've mentioned some of the results of streamlining your brand throughout this talk, but pretty much everything in my mind goes back to the most effective ways to build an overall brand. So I thought we would close here with a quote about the effects of streamlining straight from the horse's mouth, as it was. So we're going to bring up Matt Walker, who has graciously agreed to talk here just briefly. He's one of the owners of Nelson Brewing, and he's going to tell you about his experience with streamlining their brand.
Well, I got 2 pages of my quote that I'm not going to read. It's 2 pages long. Yeah, you saw the old pictures we had of our old cans, and it was kind of crazy. We inherited some of it. We tried to do a rebrand on our own a little bit, trying to streamline because they were all over the map. And then obviously the explosion of the craft beer industry. We couldn't even find our own cans in the fridge. We're stand back 10 feet. So it take us a few minutes to point our own beer. So that's when we called these guys and started the whole process and found out a lot about ourselves, even going through it and what we liked and what we didn't like. And these guys are pros. I'll tell you that. They'll hold your hand like they did with us. Yeah, it really is. It was interesting to like look back and see kind of like the progression of our own brand. But I mean, over the years, lots of our breweries were a small group of people. We're all wearing many hats, or you're sitting in a room, you think you're doing a good job, and then it lands flat. And this needed to happen for us. Bit rocky. We also went to 473, is coming from 355. So there's a few things happening all at once, but the people that were mad at us because they can't get their 355 or their hooligan Pilsner are now coming back because they still love us. They're mad for a bit, but they have come back. And a side note was within our brewery, the stress is gone. When we have a new release, limited release, or whatever it be, the cans, the labels are there. We're ready to go. Where before we'd have a beer literally sitting there ready to be canned, and we're hoping for that truck to back up and like give us the boxes. We're like waiting and waiting. That's stressful. So it just it's made our lives easier. It looks great. When we stand back and we have more than 1 or 2 brands or 2 SKUs in the fridge. A little bit of brand blocking, looks great, looks united. And that's what we needed. Is that good?
That's awesome.
Whew.
Thank you. Thank you. Take that.
So that's it. I put up a QR code here with a link to these slides. If anybody wants to get them, if you missed something, maybe you want to write it down or didn't write it down, whatever. There's a link as well. So scan it or take a picture of the link. I don't know, whatever. Does anyone have any questions for us? What sort of questions? Yeah. One at the back. First one at the back. Oh, gosh. Okay. First one's a hard one. Question was, how would we have rebranded Anchor Steam? Oh,
How long is a piece of string?
I mean-
okay, so do you want me to handle this one?
yeah. God.
Okay, so you don't necessarily need to stick with the old tobacco flavor packaging look here, but there's personality, there's love, there's life, there's history here. This is corporate boardroom. This is people in suits making decisions for people that are drinking this beer. This person isn't this person. So the main problem that I see here is they didn't look at their core demographic. They went to a design company who might not necessarily specialize in our industry. And this is our industry. We've been here a very long time. So I understand this drinker. I understand this drinker. They're not the same people. So I would have redone this with more flexible artwork. The bonus of something like this is it is flexible. The vector artwork is very scalable. It's very easy to use. You can put it on your trucks and all that sort of stuff, but you don't need to do that with this. So there's a way to modernize this and bring this into a flexible world without losing the love and the personality of it. I'm not going to sit here and say what artwork I would have done because I mean, I get paid a lot of money for that. So I'd rather get paid to do that. But you don't like they drop the ball. This is something, this looks like iced tea. And they lost the love of what that is. So I would have just personality. It needed to retain the and build on, quite frankly, the personality of that brand. And I mean, they did something with it, but it's not what it could have been.
I also imagine what Richard would have done would have been janky. You know, this has got that old crappy kind of, not crappy, awesome and crappy at the same time, right? But it's a little janky, and that doesn't have any of it. So that's when we talk about personality, right? That's part of it. This looks old and handmade, you know, and with that comes a little jankiness maybe in the look, and that could have,
We'll call it texture.
sure, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. Of course, when you're in the room with the decision makers through the branding process, it could have gone a whole different way too. So it's an excellent and very difficult question to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give you word, but you're the one that says yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I noticed when you were talking a few times there, you kept bringing up 4-pack. You know, I never heard 6-pack talk. Is there a reason that you use 4-pack as an example? Or?
I used it as, so the question was, why was I using 4-packs as an example instead of maybe 6s or 12s or whatever? I was using it as an example just because it seems like the entry point for a lot of new craft beer consumers, right? Somebody who I was trying to put myself into the head of somebody who's new to this world, you know, there's somebody who's legal age now, and they maybe have seen a couple brands, tried a couple brands, they go into the liquor store and they're surrounded by 4-packs. Not always. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. I just kind of picked one and stuck with it there. I think everything I was saying there would be applicable to single cans or 6s or 12s as well. Yeah. 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 Question over here.
We're a say that all of this advice is scalable and like, because most of the people that are gonna be buying our cans are quite close to us geographically, do you wanna have more detail and more sort of subtle references that the locals get, or do you, like, I think, like, Fernie Brewing Company is right beside us.
Okay.
Like, they're an hour away, but they obviously have different, it's a different issue that they might face with their branding. There's a super streamlined, should ours do that?
Well, it kind of depends a bit on your plans for growth. Like, yeah, are you planning on staying small? Are you planning on distributing to your local region, to the locals? Or are you planning on, I mean, these guys are everywhere,
Yeah,
right?
we're not
Like,
planning on that.
okay, so then maybe, it's a tough question to answer, but I don't know if it matters as much. You know, like locals, especially when you're outside of the big metropolitan regions, love local aspects on local products, right? And you'd kind of be a fool to not dig into that. Can you do that and still be scalable? I think it's possible, right? You know, like, I don't know what the exact answer for your situation would be, but I mean, things like Nelson with the maps, you know, that's a little local reference for the locals that they like.
Yeah.
I would say definitely work it in, but maybe not in a way that alienates people once you get it outside of that region, you know? Yeah, yeah, like everybody, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It can be done in scalable ways or non-scalable ways. There's no easy way to answer that. Like it.
That's the thing. Okay, so as Leif touched on, locals care about local things. As soon as you go outside of that geographical region, people aren't going to get the reference. So you're wasting your time and your money and your marketing efforts there. So that's not as valuable as if you're just going to be a brew pub and you're just going to be selling out of that location. Right. So if your plan is to go, you know, into Alberta, maybe Washington, so that sort of thing, spending a lot of time on like maybe like a statue that's like in the town center that everybody knows but nobody else gives a shit about doesn't really matter. So that's wasted effort. You're better to put your efforts into something that is scalable upwards. So focus on branding that really goes after the general market, if that is your plan. And it's okay to always have like those like little special releases that are like maybe a local landmark, but don't make that your core. You know, it's like a restaurateur who starts a restaurant and then all of a sudden they have 4 across one province and then they go into another province. It starts to like get watered down and, you know, it's not as important, the local landmarks that they might have like built their brand off of. It's the same thing. All branding is the same thing like that. You know, locals are going to care. So give them little gifts of seasonal releases that they can stand behind, but make your cores nationwide. Make it focused for everybody.
The only one twist on that would be if you're in a really, really popular tourist destination like Whistler or something, right? Where people are like, yeah, I went to Whistler. I love Whistler. Some fools. I'm definitely buying that beer. If you're in Saniston, I don't know. Anybody? Any other last questions? Yeah.
Yep.
So are there other examples of people that are in that custom world that are doing well? Feeling an anomaly.
They are kind of at this point. I mean, some of the Phillips stuff feels like that, but some of it doesn't, right? I'm not good on my feet with questions like this. Anything?
I mean, yeah, it does exist, but you're seeing people move away more and more from it. And like you said, it's that cost, it's the time.
I don't think it's just those. I think it's really hard to do it and achieve that thing that we've been banging on here about instant recognition of new products, right? Like, so that's almost like a cannery does some of it.
Yeah.
But
Driftwood is an anomaly in the simple fact that we were one of the first to really do that with that like that, those beers have been around for over a decade now in the same packaging, and they haven't changed. All we've done is gone from bottles to cans. So that's really what they're known for. But things like Apex, like that's the same level of complexity with illustration, and I've only gotten faster. So, I can bang these out, in a pretty economical amount of time. So, there are ways to hit both. You can be really cool and artistically focused, but I don't have to think about where the logo is going. I don't have to think about where the love story is going. I don't have to think about like art style or subject matter, that sort of stuff. So that's where the time saving comes in. That creative process can really take a lot of time in the back end. Like I can draw anything. Drawing's easy. Thinking of the stuff is the difficult part. So, yeah, it is possible. A lot of people just don't, and they're being successful with it. Yeah, there's ways to do everything successfully as long as it's done really well. Like just do everything really well. It's just that easy.
Good questions. Good questions, everybody. I think we got to go. There's another session coming up. Thank you very much. If you have further questions, come find us.